Invocation will be delivered by Pastor Mark Schreiber of the Family of Christ Lutheran Church in Holton, Wisconsin. After the invocation, we'll join in saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. Shall we stand for Pastor Schreiber in the invocation?
Good morning. Before the prayer of invocation, I'd just like to share a couple of verses from Psalm 51. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we do ask that you open our lips this day, that we might declare the greatness of your creation that you have laid before us in all of its beauty. Lord, open our lips so that we might declare the truth, that you desire mercy, justice, compassion. Lord, we ask that you be with all these elected officials this day. Lord, give them wisdom in the decisions they make and give them guidance. Lord, we ask that you bless this meeting in your holy name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. Thank you, Pastor. Well, we call to order the March meeting of the St. Croix County Board of Supervisors, and we'll proceed to the roll call. Will the clerk, Cindy Campbell, please call the roll?
Lois Burry. Here. Brian Hurchin. Here. Julie Spear. Here. Joel Hurchin. Here. Bill Peavy is absent. Gerald Peterson. Here. Charlie Grant. Here. Tom Dowd. Here. Chuck Mills. Here. Richard King. Here. Wallace Halfhager. John Mortensen. Here. Esther Wentz. Here. Jean Ritz is absent. Gordon Awesome. Here. Tom Kaplish, absent. Chuck Strumke. Here. Richard Marzoff. Here. Sharon Norton Bauman. Here. Ronald Troyer. Here. Roger Repholz. Here. Bill Cranmer. Here. Daryl Standifer. Here. John Borup. Here. Clarence Malick.
Here.
Don Jordan. Here. Ron Raymond. Here. Cindy Leonard. Here. Linda Lucky. Here. Stan Kruger. Here. Denise Gunderson. Here. 4 absent.
4 absent, 27 present. Let's hear from the administrative coordinator with his report. Mr. Whiting, if you please.
Good morning. Oh, thank you. First, I'll let you know that the Nursing Home Proposal Review Committee has chosen Christian Community Homes of Hudson, Inc. as the preferred service provider from the RFP process, and that committee is initiating exclusive negotiations with them for a possible proposal for the county board to consider. I'll let you know that. Some of the other things that I have are on the county board agenda already. One thing that is not is the April goal setting session for the committee, or for the board. The administration committee, working with my office and the department heads, will put together kind of a summary status of the goals from last April for the board to review. The board will have its regular meeting on the 17th and then go down to the community room. I believe we're going to have lunch for the board members that day, and you can spend the afternoon reviewing the status of those goals and come up with any new ones that you would like. What's that?
We'll stay in the board.
Stay in the boardroom?
Yeah, we've got the big bus trial going on.
Oh, okay, that's right. I forgot about that. All right. That's the Eau Claire trial that they're referring to. So we'll stay in this room. A couple things that are on the agenda, just touch on briefly, the Human Resources Administrator position. That was approved by the Finance Committee. You've been given kind of a diagram of the administration suite and the departments within the suite. There were other options that the committee considered that we didn't share with the board. That's the one that they proposed. And the plan for a plan presentation that you'll get a briefing on for this property, the government center property. There's been 3 community meetings on that property, and Dennis Welch is here from Barsness to go over the results of those 3 for you here today. That's my report.
Questions, supervisors? Well, thank you, Mr. Whiting. Reviewing the agenda, we have some last-minute changes. Under the consent agenda, number 5 will be taken off the consent agenda, dealt with as a separate item for its own motion. The Veteran Service Officer will not be giving his report today. We're informed we'll reschedule him to a future month. And the Administration Committee report regarding a decorum bylaw will be moved forward to next meeting also. With that, those are the only changes the chair is aware of. We're in a position to consider the remaining items of the consent agenda if you wish. Ms. Gunderson makes the motion, Mr. Mortensen seconds it. All in favor of the consent agenda, please vote aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes unanimously. Now, number 5 there, the resolution authorizing the issuing of ID cards to St. Croix County supervisors. You should have received in your meeting preparation materials the proposed resolution, which has been endorsed by the Emergency Management and Communications Committee and by the Public Protection Committee both on March 20th. Would somebody wish to advance the motion? Mr. Mells, are you making the motion? Is there a second? Ms. Spear offers a second. Any debate or discussion desired on this deal? I would say that the staff is ready to prepare those ID cards today during a break or whenever you find the time. In the administration suite, the very first door on the right is the place to have that done. If you can put on your best smile or whatever visage you think is appropriate for your card, and have your picture taken and your card completed and handed to you a moment later. Any question or debate? All in favor of the motion should now vote aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes unanimously. We have no appointments to announce today, so let's consider old and new business. First item, a resolution on the designation of elder adult at risk and adult at risk agencies. This was provided in your meeting preparation materials. It looks like this. And the resolution comes to this board from the Health and Human Services Board. Ms. Wentz, do you wish to offer the motion? Motion by Esther Wentz, second by Supervisor Troyer. Any discussion? Mr. Marzoff.
At the very bottom of the resolution, it indicates the effective date to be March since that's already passed, I wanted to suggest that pending ratification of this resolution, if it's expedient that this become immediate, that we change March 1st, 2007 to the words immediately upon ratification of this resolution, or if that's not that urgent, then change March 1st to April 1st.
If we change that date, will there be a gap during which there is no designated agency, Ms. Wentz? Which is your choice, Mr. Marzoff, for the proposed amendment to this resolution?
I would say immediately.
So we are being asked to substitute for the words March 1st, 2007, the word immediately. Is there a second?
I'm sorry, immediately upon ratification of this resolution.
Immediately upon ratification of this resolution. Is there a second for that amendment?
Ratification wouldn't be the proper term. Adopted would be the proper term.
Are you agreeable for adopted? Immediately upon adoption of this resolution. Second is still okay, Mr. Cranmer? Mr. Standifer?
I just inquire what the practical effect would be if it's adopted as it indicates with an effective date of March 1st. Doesn't it become retroactive to the 1st of March, and isn't the effect the same?
Mr. Marzoff, do you wish to respond to that question?
I would see the words retroactive in the resolution, so therefore I would like to keep the amendment as stated.
Rebuttal, Mr. Standifer?
I'm not arguing it. I don't see what we're accomplishing by changing it.
Any further discussion or debate on the amendment? The proposed amendment is to substitute for March 1, 2007 immediately upon adoption of this resolution. All in favor of the amendment should now vote aye. Aye. Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Chair declares the amendment has passed. The main motion now as amended. Any further discussion or debate? All in favor of the amended motion should now vote aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes unanimously. Our next item of business is number 2, resolution designating April 2 through 6, 2007 as Work Zone Safety and Awareness Week in St. Croix County. This comes to this board from the Transportation Committee. Do you wish to make the motion, Mr. King?
I'll make that motion.
Is there, and Mr. Grant seconds it. Any discussion, debate, amendment? Chair sees no hands. All in favor of the motion should now vote aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes unanimously. Third item of old and new business, resolution urging a ban on the artificial feeding of deer. And this resolution comes to this board from the Land and Water Conservation Committee. Mr. Raymond, do you wish to move it? Is there a second? Mr. Marzoff seconds it. Any discussion, debate, amendment? Mr. Strumke?
I'm just kind of curious. We have a deer population problem in the state of Wisconsin. Feeding deer, I don't think it's going to cause more deer. Maybe somebody could, from that committee, explain the hazard or the concern other than tuberculosis, as I read. I don't see the need for this.
My reading is that 2 diseases are mentioned in the resolution. Tuberculosis and chronic wasting disease. Does that answer your question satisfactorily, Mr. Strumke?
Actually not, because I understand that there's certain criteria that you're not supposed to feed deer so that they don't transmit the chronic wasting disease. Tuberculosis, as I said, isn't a problem in Wisconsin. Feeding deer in Wisconsin is not going to entice deer to come across from Minnesota. I would just maybe somebody could explain again. I understand the diseases, but I don't understand the concern and the idea about prohibiting people from feeding deer.
Mr. Marzoff.
I think the wording of the resolution and the supporting documentation on the blue page both indicate that the diseases are spread through the saliva of the deer, and the risk of transmitting that to farm animals is grave. And it also allows the continuation of the feeding of farm animals, but deer can get into those areas, and that's just going to exacerbate the problem. But I think the congregate feeding of deer on private property that is not farmland is a reason for concern, and therefore I think we should support this resolution.
Any further discussion or debate desired? Mr. Cranmer.
Yes, I was interested in why there is no particular exception in this for agricultural producers who may have deer coming to their property. I noticed that Bill Peavy, who does not happen to be here today, objected to that in committee, and I was wondering why, Ron, perhaps you could explain why that particular item is not in this as an exception.
Mr. Raymond, do you desire to respond?
Excuse me, I've got, a couple of people in the audience that can carry on the discussion with some zeal, but let me say, last year this resolution came to us as a committee, and we reviewed it, and at that time, we didn't bring it forth to the county board because we didn't feel that the science and the evidence, et cetera, supported it. And this year, Mike Ryder from the Sports Alliance brought it forward. And Mike, it turns out, I think, was in his past life a biologist at 3M. So he really had the knowledge to describe to the committee what was going on at these feeders that was assisting in the spread of chronic wasting disease and possibly other diseases. So we as a committee debated it, and this year felt that the science supported the need for us to support the legislation, not necessarily to pass the ban. That'll be debated at the state legislature. I don't know that that answered your concerns, Supervisor Cramner, but.
I assume that there was a discussion to this point about agricultural producers when you discussed this, because Bill Peavy asked for this to be in the minutes. He objected because there was no special exception for agricultural producers.
Well, we didn't, there's no special exception, but the DNR enforcement people were there, and the discussion also included the fact that the DNR wasn't too concerned about people that were feeding cattle. It doesn't, the feeding of cattle in an agricultural sense. You guys want to get up and talk? Okay.
There's a microphone up here, Bob. Please use it so that we get a record and so we can all hear.
Bill, what I would comment on is even in the 26 counties where CWD is currently in place, where they have banned both baiting and feeding, an agricultural exemption for normal agricultural practices is still allowed. That's not the intent of this, is to disallow agricultural producers from feeding their cattle. That's not the intent of this law at all. It's for specifically feeding deer. That's what we're after.
belated introductions. First speaker was Bob Heisey, the department head from Land and Water Conservation, and the second speaker was Dr. Mike Ryder, Secretary and Treasurer of the Sportsman's Alliance and a member of the Conservation Congress. Supervisors, do you need to hear more before voting? All in favor of this resolution should now vote aye. 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 And opposed, nay. Chair declares that the motion has passed. The judges wish to speak on item number 6 at 9:30, and I'm trying to manage our schedule to allow them and the folks who are appearing in their courtrooms to do that. So let's take on number 4 on our agenda, the next thing up, the PTO donation policy, with a recognition that if we're still talking at 9:30, we may take a short break in the progress there to move to number 6. Number 4, the resolution on paid time off donation policy, looks like this, was provided in your pre-meeting materials. Comes to us from the Finance Committee. Mr. Kruger?
Yes. I'll move it to the floor.
Second, Supervisor Wentz. Discussion, supervisors, on the adopting of the personal time off PTO donation policy. You need discussion or debate before voting on it? Mr. Marzoff.
I would just like to commend the Finance Committee and Michelle Petrick for creating this plan. I think it's very equitable.
Any other discussion, debate, amendments? All in favor of the resolution should now vote aye. Aye. And opposed, nay. Passes unanimously. Item number 5 on our agenda, the Barsness Consulting Incorporated report on the government center property. We'll begin on this one. Again, if necessary, we'll break into it to take up the judgeship. Dennis Welsh is here from the Barsness Consulting. You've met him before, so probably no further introduction is necessary. But he is prepared to give perhaps you better operate from this microphone, Dennis. They do have a battery now? It's already been done? Okay. The floor is yours, Dennis.
Board, good morning. It's nice to be here and tell you about progress we've made, or at least the public portions of the review of the plan for the plan and where to go next. We'll need to use an overhead in a minute or two, but maybe while we're waiting for the judges, I can just give you a brief overview of what we've done, and then we'll take up the overhead on the other end of that discussion with the judges. BCS, which is the company I work with, works with the Finance Committee, and we, in fact, created a plan in which we would review with neighbors, the EDC, the government and nonprofit entities, the business sector, and finally the county board, alternative ideas about what kind of development could occur on the county government center site. That means that so far, and if I could include you in that review process, I'd say we've at least talked to over 110 people. And we've gotten some very interesting responses, ideas. Nobody's spoken so adamantly that there's only one solution, but lots of suggestions have been made. We're at that point in the process now where we need to go back, after reporting to the board, we need to go back to the Finance Committee and begin to consolidate all this information and come forth to you again with a summary plan that would then be submitted to the board for approval, and from the board on to the city for its consideration as part of the city's comprehensive planning process in 2007 and 8. Last night, the Barsness Group met with the business community. I suspect that the business community has attended in numerous different forms at any one or more of the 4 meetings. So last night's attendance was 4 business people. And I will give you a kind of an update on their interests, and we'll kind of come from most recent to the ones that we heard first. The Business Roundtable was one of those where we gave a brief presentation. I should tell you that I'm starting to get the jokes about this is a wallpaper contest because we have so many charts and wallpaper materials up. So it was a good opportunity to first review the proposal with them, the information we had to date, and then glean from them additional information. Here. Okay, glad to stop right now.
Permit me to interrupt you, Dennis, so that we can accommodate the judicial schedule. Let's take up item number 6 on our agenda, which is a resolution reapproving a 4th judgeship for St. Croix County. This was, the form of it was adopted this morning by the Finance Committee unanimously among those present at the time. A precursor form of it with not quite so up-to-date numbers was adopted by the full Finance Committee unanimously at a previous meeting. I'll ask at this point, Mr. Kruger, do you wish to make the motion to adopt?
So move.
Yes, and second comes from Supervisor Wentz. Perhaps the judges or your spokesman would use one or more of our microphones. You've been elected at least twice, haven't you, Judge? This is Judge Needham, for those of you who don't recall his name or our viewing audience.
Good morning. As you'll recall, I think it was in January of '05, we had a similar resolution in front of you, which was approved at that time. Since then, matters have, I think, in our opinion at least, become more critical in terms of our need for a 4th judge. In the interim also, the Supreme Court requisitioned a study of statistics, in other words, trying to figure out how many judges each county or the state needed. The 3 of us and all county judges throughout the state then participated in a 1-month long, time-intensive study where we had to keep track of every 6 minutes of what we did from the moment we entered the government center until the day ended. That was done statewide, and with all of that information and the wonder of a consultant and a computer, it gave back to us then what our judicial need is. That study was completed about a year ago, and once all of the numbers came in, St. Croix ranked number 11 as of December of '05 for judges. That study also indicated that statewide we needed 18 more judges in the state. St. Croix being one of those, obviously ranking number 11. Also, as part of that study, the Supreme Court asked that we update the information so we could make it current as of '06, which has now been done. The numbers as of '05 indicated that St. Croix needed 4.4 judges to cover our caseloads. I will also tell you that it's my recollection that there's not been a new judgeship statewide since 1998, added in the entire state. And so the Supreme Court is now contemplating putting forth a bill to the legislature which would add additional judges throughout the state. As of December of '06, the new statistics are out, and we have grown to 4.76 judicial need. So our numbers have increased by almost 0.25% in 1 year in terms of our caseloads and what's needed. That also changed our ranking. We are number 9 now in the state in terms of judicial need. The Committee of Chief Judges, which is comprised of 10 judges statewide, there are 10 judicial districts. Each judicial district has a chief judge and a deputy chief judge. They meet monthly, and I just learned when I returned to the office on Monday that at the meeting that was conducted by the chief judges, I believe a week ago, they unanimously approved a resolution that will recommend to the legislature that St. Croix be included in a 7-judgeship bill. We rank number 9, but we have been in essence moved up the ladder because of our growth, because of the potential for growth that continues to exist in this county. And so that now is being recommended to the Supreme Court that they will now introduce a bill to the legislature asking for 7 new judges statewide. St. Croix would be included as one of those judges. And so we're here today basically to ask again for your affirmation of the resolution that you passed 2 years ago, again with your support of that 4th judgeship. The numbers, as I said, have been updated. Our population growth, thanks to Dave Ferdozi and his office for getting these updated numbers, is now 23.5%. That's what our percentage of growth is. The 05 resolution, our percentage of growth I looked up was 14.8. So again, our growth as a county is exponential. Also, we are now the 78th fastest growing county in the state. And as I said, the judicial caseload need is now up to 4.76 judges. So that in essence is the foundation for which we now seek your approval for this 4th judgeship. We are hopeful that Representative Rhodes and Senator Harsdorf, who have been on board with us for the last couple of years, will continue to be. We are planning on meeting with Representatives Murtha and Raychuk as well to endorse their support for that 4th judgeship. And hopefully with this resolution, we'll have some additional firepower to go to them with that. Questions?
In paying for this, does the county pay part of it, or they pay all of it, or does the state pay? How does that?
And again, you'll probably have to ask your finance people, but the judge and his court reporter, or her court reporter, are paid by the state. And then there are allocations that come from the state as well to support the courts. I can tell you that the Supreme Court in their budget this year is recommending a significant increase in dollars being returned to the counties. And I believe that the governor has adopted at least part of that as well to help fund the courts, because again, there is this constant friction between the county and the state relative to the funding of courts. But at least the Supreme Court is recommending a significant increase. And I think, as I understand, the governor has likewise endorsed more monies coming back to the counties. Yes, Supervisor.
I got about 3 hows here. To further answer that question, if people go down to the second from the bottom, whereas on there, this resolution commits the county to providing the necessary court facilities and support staff should an additional circuit court judgeship be created and the state decline to supply sufficient funding. And it continues. So the resolution actually commits us. The first question I have for your honor is, as soon as the legislature approves this and say it's mid-election period, how does that position get filled?
And I should have covered that. As I understand the bill that's going to be introduced, it would have an effective date for that judge of August 1 of '08.
Okay,
so the election would be in April of '08 with that person taking office on August 1st of '08.
Okay, and then this is probably not your question, the Finance Committee, I guess, but we're committing to a potential payer, because this, if I was the state legislature, I'd jump right on this one and say, okay, here's your judge, and you guys suck up all the pay. But we don't have any figures here on what that really includes. Now, I can support the resolution because it's a logical one, but I think we're going out here without a financial issue, knowing what this really is going to cost us. Thank you.
That is a perfectly appropriate question, and a point I would have made if no one else does. We will no doubt have corresponding requests from the Clerk of Court's office for appropriate staff, possibly some furniture requirements, library requirements, subscriptions to various kinds of supporting materials. And what is more, given that using the state's numbers, the 4.76, is the existing state-weighted caseload. We will probably not be able to justify reductions in some of the other related support staff, court commissioners and the like. Believe me, you can expect the Finance Committee to try, but forecasting it may not be possible to have any offsetting reductions. Now, that also means that most likely those various fines, fees, penalties, and so on that are passed through to litigants in one way or another will not be expected to increase, because we are dealing with the caseload now, and we will deal with the caseload after we have another judge. So there will probably not be significant increased revenue either, except for possibly some relief in the governor's bill and the support that comes from the Supreme Court's proposed budget. So it is conceivable that in 2008, at least some 4 months of additional expense related to having another judge on board will impact the St. Croix County budget. And at this point, 2008 is not looking like a good budget year, because we all know we've had this downturn in housing starts. That drives our increase in our tax base, you know, the property tax revenue standpoint. So this commitment may be at the expense of things the county might otherwise do with its available revenue. And it would be foolhardy to pretend otherwise.
And I think, as I understand the resolution, it in essence adopts status quo. In other words, the county is already paying for facilities and support staff. And I think this resolution just affirms that if there's not a change in terms of how the courts are funded statewide, that the county will continue to do what they've been doing under the existing setup that we have. The judge's salary, court reporter salaries, and those fees would not be included in a resolution such as this. Those are state funded. That's all paid by the state.
Mr. Martinson.
Our present building, does that allow for a room for a fourth judge?
We have 4 courtrooms, and yes, it will accommodate. We'll have to make some adjustments. There's some security issues that I think I kind of mentioned when we were here this fall that might be presented because we only have access to the jail through 2 courtrooms. And if we continue on a rotating intake system, which we currently have, it might require some creativity. But we have 4 courtrooms, which is one of the luxuries that we have as compared to other counties in terms of this judgeship bill, because that's one of the prerequisites that both the Supreme Court and the legislature have, is that you have facilities available for use.
Supervisors need any more discussion before voting?
There's one more hand up.
Mr. Cranmer.
Yes, I was wondering if there is going to be need for an assistant DA, an additional assistant DA, to go along with this.
The district attorney maintains that there is a need presently for at least 1 FTE. Proposed in last year's budget was a minimal request of, if I remember right, 4/10 of an FTE to scrape by, but the governor's budget of some years back trimmed about 2/3 of an FTE, if that's right. So there's no question of a need that already exists. It would not be expected to be an increasing need unless there are scheduling changes.
Correct.
Because all the existing caseload is being dealt with now, although it may be by judges borrowed from other counties or the like.
And we've had some preliminary discussions with the district attorney about trying to accommodate his staffing if in fact we get a 4th judge. Because we understand that will impact them as well in terms of how they schedule their assistants. Right now, we pretty much each have 1 assistant assigned to a judge, but that also will include how we utilize facilities. And if we go to specialty courts where 1 or 2 judges would do nothing but criminals, that we can maintain the current secured courtrooms as opposed to all 4 judges doing criminal, but there are lots of things that could be done, but we're certainly sensitive to that and have assured the district attorney that we'll work with him if his numbers aren't increased. But we're dealing with this 4.76 currently with what he has for staff.
An argument can be made that the public defender staff should increase too. There are impacts throughout that grow out of our population growth in this county. It's not only school districts who are seeking more facilities. Anything else that needs to be said here, amendments to offer or anything like that before we vote? All right, at this time we will vote, and all in favor of the resolution should now vote aye. Aye. And opposed should vote nay. It passes unanimously. Thank you. And by the way, we're delighted to see you recovered to health.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for your kind thoughts and back in full force.
Good. Speaking of health, I probably should have said something earlier. We're delighted to see Ms. Burry with us today and functioning fully.
Delighted to be here.
Very good. Very good. Mr. Welsh, would you try to pick up after that? I don't know whether I should say it's a hard act to follow. It's a different act to follow, at least, huh?
Okay, sorry. Here's where we were, or where we are today with a series of meetings. We had a neighborhood meeting February 28th. We met with the Economic Development Group, Land Use Subcommittee on February 5th. We met with the Government Nonprofits Roundtable on the 15th, the business sector yesterday, and back here today for the County Board report. From the business section, and I think we'll kind of go through these in a reverse order because of, from last night's meeting, I don't have any formal notes yet. But from last night's meeting, the business group told us that the northeast quadrant of the government center site, the 82-acre site we're now on, should be used continuously for county services. And you should rest assured, no one said the county should move. Which I thought someone might come up with, but no, we didn't get that. The next item that the business community recommended was that there be a large enough space for satellite training facilities for the county and others in partnership with an higher education institution. Even that could be somehow coordinated with a library on the site. The business community supported the expansion of the Y. A library in this case, the northwest quadrant of the site rather than housing. They did not recommend any housing for this site. They recommended that the county retain flexibility on the site for the highest and best market uses at the time when the county decides that they have enough land and the rest of the land can be reused for other purposes. The government and nonprofit discussion, which occurred on March 15th, it's a little bit different discussion. And again, the government nonprofit group said reserve land for county expansion. Don't divide all the land and disperse it. There was a need expressed by the government and nonprofit group for public safety library improvements. They consider this to be the prime location for collaborative work, county, city, township. This same group, the government and nonprofit group, found that there was, that in this particular area, the young demographics, the growing population, the need for more technology, and the need for a community gathering space such as the Y or an expansion of the Y, make this a very good site for those future kinds of developments. As you might surmise, the Y was considered a logical expansion into a portion of the county government center site. What was interesting about that discussion was that they looked at the Y as being part of the public campus, the sense of place that the county, in its vision, and as far back as 1985, created, and that any buildings built should complement both the Y and the architecture of the county government center itself. This group, the government nonprofit group, said residential would not be a good use on this site, that the planning for this site should designate the entire government center site, the 82 acres, as unique, something that has an identity, something that can support both, we'd mentioned the library, but police, fire, library, beyond just the limits of the city. And here's another interesting point that I think came up in at least 3 of the discussions. Any purchaser of county property should pay fair market value, no discounts. The Y, being 10 years old, having 10,000 members, being landlocked, needs a future plan of its own, and that is in the process as we understand it. May not be appropriate to have retail on this site. This is the recommendation from the government and nonprofit group. They consider the Y to be a buffer between whatever uses would occur on the county site and the residential area to the west. They believe that the process that you're using, this plan for a plan process, this collaborative model, could be used in other areas of the county, and they found this to be a rather unique process. The traffic is an issue, and it came up again and again in most every one of these discussions, as you might expect. But in relationship to the Y, the idea of dispersing traffic east out to Carmichael as well as south out to Vine had some significant interest and support from the government and nonprofit group. And then finally, consider using a portion of the site beyond the typical issues we've talked about, which were fire, police, EMS, library. How about daycare facilities for employees in this direct area? There is interest in seeing that the county and whoever purchases the land uses unique, what is called green architecture. That's a current term of the trade, meaning recyclable, sustainable architecture. Another suggestion from the government group was, could the county allow for the site to be bought down over time by some of the other governmental entities at fair market price? Noting that even the library would take 3 years to be constructed, there was concern by the government group that a time frame for development would be necessary, and that the Finance Committee and the County Board should establish some kind of longer-term time frame for whatever happens on the site. An interesting proposal came from the United Way, which said, well, if all of these uses do occur out on this site, perhaps this is the opportune time to start thinking in terms of a nonprofit center or training and meeting room, which could be attached to a library or a training facility for EMS, police, any of those mixes and matches. But the idea is that there are so many nonprofits in the county that they ought to have one central location where all the users who similarly come to the county building might be able to come to that nonprofit location. excellent concept from the government group was to combine the technology created in this area to share it among the county buildings. If the library were to create some new high-speed whiz-bang technology, that technology should be shared with all of the buildings on the site. In what they consider a excellent location for joint training, classrooms, lifelong learning, and gathering spaces. The next one came back from the Economic Development Land Use Committee, this group, who said that, similar to some of the others, the YMCA should be expanded, that there should be more pathways and connections throughout the site, or they should be preserved as they are, that there is a need for speaking with the adjoining neighbors regarding preserving a buffer, that there ought to be room for expansion of the government center site itself. So similar to all the others, don't sell yourself short in terms of the current building. There will be needs in the future. An architectural master plan was suggested. This is by the Economic Development Commission. Health and Human Services Plan might be part of the long-term concept that should be considered on this site. Like the other groups, they also agreed that library, police, fire, and office space should be considered complementary uses. One of the unique concepts that they talked about was that even though those uses might not produce new property tax, because they create an amenity on this site, a central meeting place, they will create higher value on the sites that surround it. Starting with the Finance Committee and then the Economic Development Committee, we did look at some alternative government center sites around in this case, because of closeness, the metropolitan area, to determine how best other governmental units had shared their sites with adjoining public and private uses. And three key points came up again and again. First of all, a government center site usually can't be consumed by parking. It has to share parking. It can't have this 60 acres or whatever and have 40 acres of parking. And that you do need to consider how to deal with the storm runoff and the ponding in this site. But we have a commitment for about 10 acres of ponding when at full development. And then, let's move on to this real quickly. The neighborhood meeting, which was held on February 28th, had 62 participants. It was held in this room. We introduced the site in 4 different quadrants, and what we simply said was it'd be better to think of this in smaller pieces rather than one 82-acre piece. So we created what was called a northeast, a northwest, southwest, and southeast piece. The northeast piece is where the county government center is today. We profiled the site history, and then we did something called a dot matrix exercise where we asked the residents in the area to consider what were the most important items that they foresaw on this site. And you probably heard about this either in the paper or through the neighborhood rumblings. We used the blue, green, and orange dot matrix system. I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail, but essentially what happened is each participant ranked the uses on the sites. Here's an example. This one happens to be the northwest quadrant, and in that quadrant, if you see the open space edges protecting those, received 42 of the blue ribbon or best idea. And if we were to compare that with the residential small clusters, Under the orange category, which was very cautious, maybe not for this site, 28 were on that end of the spectrum. So in the northwest quadrant, and I'm summarizing only from the neighborhood meeting, the significant issue was protect the open space, protect the pavement, the paved pathway, sorry, protect the unpaved pathway. Then, looking at the northeast quadrant, that is the current site we're on, neighbors very consistent with all the other meetings we held, save the land for county expansion, create a buffer along the north and west corner, very cautious, maybe opposed to multifamily housing on this quadrant. In the southwest quadrant, which is where the Y is abutting the Y in the office buildings abut the county site, the neighbors felt that the most significant supportable idea was recreation for through the YMCA buildings, and most opposed to senior housing and affordable senior housing. And then finally, on the southeast quadrant, which is the corner of Carmichael and Vine, the neighborhood group said, well, they would support the public buildings, and I suspect that might include, and I'm not going to try to take words out of their mouth, but I suspect that public buildings might include library, fire, and county services. The most opposed, again, was multifamily uses. So, the summary of the neighborhood meetings was that park and open space be retained, the county retain control of some of the land, the library is needed, community facilities are needed, especially EMS, fire, police, that go beyond the boundaries of simply Hudson. Improve the transportation, everybody talked about that, every one of the meetings. The trails should be retained, more county human services courts, offices should be considered, no commercial or residential, no high density, add recreation, schools, offices, housing, ponding, add buffers from the residential area, and the value to the county should be at least fair market value and more value by adding green spaces. The summary of the quality issues was the community emphasis, community participation, and discussion in this process. And I think you, the Finance Committee, and the various committees have started that process very well. Conservation of green space, a big issue for the neighborhood group. Thoughtful, firm, high-quality planning. Modern technology, thinking again of if there is a library, and shared energy use if that's possible. Transportation improvements, which could help the situation at Grandview and at the YMCA. Low buildings, flexibility, a campus setting, starting on the south edge of the project rather than up on this end. Speed up the process. When the library says it's going to take 3 years, I suspect that's a long time for a lot of families. The land belongs to all of the county. Recognizing this, this statement, I heard that at every one of the meetings, that the county should receive fair market value. Now, one more issue, and that is we did receive a presentation from the concerned citizens at the neighborhood meeting, and I'm going to simply summarize the presentation, which said that there is traffic congestion. Be careful if there is any development not to exacerbate the problem. Preserve the pathways, preserve the green space, the wildlife, the plants, protect the blazing star and the spotted liatris. Acknowledge that there is a survey by Hudson which says that parks and development need to be thought of very carefully in a very growing environment like we have in St. Croix County. And then finally, there are too many banks and too many restaurants and no retail is needed. Now, the concerned citizens also said that they supported the library, as being a central location for more than just the city. Fire, police, EMS, green space, pedestrian trails, and careful planning were supported. They also recommended that the county keep control of the northeast and northwest quadrants of this 82-acre site, and that sales occur in the southeast and a small portion of the southwest. And that's the extent of this report. Now, the next step is simply to go back to the Finance Committee. We'll be summarizing all this information. We'll ask the Finance Committee to help us create a recommendation for you that puts these all into some kind of hierarchy by quadrant, and then report back to you in April or May.
Thank you, Dennis. Questions? Mr. Raymond.
I've got several questions. Good report. I think the results are probably, as some of us that have been involved with the property over the years have anticipated. A concern I've got, I noted that the citizen involvement was centered more on like the Grandview area of the county. 90% of the people that attended there were the neighbors. I'm chair of the Parks Committee, which is part of land conservation. And we had a visit from one of the concerned citizens and made a presentation to us. Also received in the mail myself copies of brochures, pamphlets. I received phone calls. It looks like that there's an organized group that has a real personal interest in how that property develops in the green space. And I think that I'm concerned that we haven't heard or provided a forum for other residents of the county to be heard. The property is owned by the citizens of the county, not necessarily the county board. And I think it's important that we hear from those people. I guess I was disappointed that we didn't have the citizen meeting in the Baldwin area where it was centrally located, and the people that are deeply engaged in some personal interest on the property maybe would have to travel a little farther to get there and allow some of the other citizens to show up. Our Committee of Parks, actually, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, we're a pretty good representation of the cross-section of the county. We go kind of from almost one corner of the county to another corner of the county and into downtown Hudson. And I think to a person, we felt maybe like we were being pressured by the citizens group, a well-organized, well-orchestrated kind of an effort, but certainly something. I chaired the Zoning and Planning Committee for many years, and when it comes to land use, I'm familiar with how one might want to move the public officials' opinion, and they certainly have done a good job of that. But I think we as officials got to stand back from that and take the responsibility to make a real judgment of how this land would be best served for the future and deliver value to the county residents. So I'd like to encourage us to think about how we might broaden the base of input that we get on this thing. That's my comment.
Dennis, why don't you recount what the Finance Committee suggested that you do with regard to stimulating comment from more remote parts of the county and talk about the website plans while you're at it.
Well, I can tell you, unfortunately, I was chasing alligators in Florida that week, or they were chasing me, actually. But I did receive the notes from the meeting and understand that the Finance Committee would like us to have some kind of outreach, whether it were through some kind of survey or other method of gaining more input from county committees as well as residents.
That's right, I forgot. Kathy covered that meeting of the Finance Committee. Perhaps I should summarize it then, and you supplement me, Stan, if I miss anything. The upshot of it was to make available one of these internet type of survey methods so that anybody in the county who wants to express an opinion about the use of this property can have their voice heard in that mechanism. Make sure that the address and a telephone are widely publicized, and not hold a meeting as such, but have announcements out there that facilitate as much as possible people from all over the county to have their suggestion, with the emphasis of supplementing the incoming information, supplementing what we already have through these meetings. And then as soon as the Barsmas Group finishes their summaries of the meetings that have been held, those summaries will be put up on the county's website. There's already a bunch of data there, and you were sent an email or a letter from Chuck telling you what that website is to keep yourself informed about it. So all those, the input from those meetings, similar to what you've just seen, will be made available on the county's website. And in addition to that, that citizens group you alluded to, I assume it's the same citizens group, has prepared a PowerPoint presentation, and that, with suitable attribution that it represents that group, of course, will also be available on the county website. Did I miss anything, Stan? No. Okay. So pretty shortly now, all that stuff will be available there, and you know, as far as speaking to your constituents, especially those of you who aren't from right in the Hudson area, tell them, make them available, make them, help them to facilitate getting their views into the mix. Supervisor Gunderson.
I'm wondering how we're going to get the public aware of that we are doing the surveys. Are we going through the paper? Are we going through cable TV? Or how are we going to do that?
We did mention taking newspaper space, advertising. I thought we'd wait and see probably what Ms. Whiff does, as a result of hearing this and what's available. And then we'd probably try in our usual way, public service announcements, and if that's not working, then actually paid advertising space. But, any thoughts you have are welcome. And I'm mindful that, particularly mindful that Supervisor Gunderson attended the neighborhood meeting and contacted me afterwards, and makes perfectly valid point, same point as Mr. Raymond's, I think, basically. We need to have a free and open opportunity for all the citizens who of course are the stakeholders, to make their input. Mr. Raymond.
And I don't mean to dominate this thing, but it's occurred to me that we as a group, I know in the past, in business and in this group, when we've had consultants or citizens group, we tend to look at that as being the answer is divined by these people. And I would like to encourage us that we're the responsible decision makers. We've got to make sure that we understand and our constituents understand that the decision has got to be left to us, that this is information gathering and not decision making. And I think that that's important in this case, because my experience is that you get a lot of public involvement from those people who have a vested interest, whose bull's being gored, if you will. And there are many constituents in the county that aren't going to take a great deal of interest in this until it's a done deal. And I think it falls to us to make those objective judgments and to use these inputs as data and not necessarily as decisions. And I'll shut up on that.
Maybe just to pursue one point, your committee did very recently complete a park planning exercise, and the county board adopted that plan. Correct me if I'm wrong, there was no discussion in there about creating a park in the city of Hudson on this site, was there?
That is true. We didn't see a large need for an additional park in this area. In fact, with the citizens group contacting me, I've taken a little more time to look around the area, and I find there's a park right across the road from over here. So we didn't deliberate on a need for parks in the Hudson area or a county park in the Hudson area, but as a result of the discussion we did have at the last meeting, there wasn't any changes in our plan.
Ms. Norton-Baumann.
Thank you.
I've come into this process a little later than some of you who've been on this board a while, and I wasn't on the board at the time that the plan was adopted for this property. I guess one of my major questions for the property is, how do we know and who will decide that this is in fact the correct and proper timely disposition of the property for the county to attain the most value for what we currently own?
Is that a question to which you want an answer, or is that a rhetorical question, a kind of a statement that
I
you're making?
would like input from anyone who might have an answer to that question.
Well, the Finance Committee has previously made a commitment that the decision will be made by the county board. How can it be otherwise? Ms. Spear, you wish to speak to that?
I guess I'm going to contradict you because I don't think it's being done by the county board. We are getting this report, and through the whole report, there was only one statement. The land does belong to all the people. But the people beyond Hudson or Roberts aren't getting the information because they don't get the Hudson paper. And if you do get the Hudson paper, sometimes you get the Hudson paper a week later. So even our mail service is not proper. I can't even get the St. Paul Pioneer Press delivered. So there are problems. And how do we go about notifying those people? I tried to talk to the different townships, telling them this is going on. But in this report, it's Hudson said, the neighbors said, etc. There's nothing that says, except for, I guess, Supervisor Gunderson was the only one that came to these meetings in Hudson. There wasn't any in Baldwin, which is a little bit of a centers.
Mr. Rebholz.
This land happens to be in my district. I've talked to a number of these people that we're talking about here now. I have never been ashamed to tell them that this land belongs to the county. And they can't expect that the people out in the county are not going to be thinking about this land and the value of it. However, I really have made about a 180-degree turn on this land from the first time we talked about it till today. When you check around and see what's going on, I think the thing that we have to do with this land is the same that we have to do with any piece of land that we do in the county, and that is not to get into a rush to sell the land. We need to explore every avenue that is open to us to do the best job of putting this land in the hands of the people that are going to use it 50, 100 years from today, because it isn't going to make any difference to me 25 years from now. So I need to think about the people that are going to be responsible for what we do today. And I think that's going to take us some time. I don't think and that's why I think the Barsness study was a very good study. And it's far from complete yet, but I believe it's going to tell us the answers that we're looking for in the long term. But let me tell you that those constituents over here that are bordering this land understand, because I've not been ashamed to tell them that it belongs to the county and not to me and not to them. We want to, however, keep them in mind, because they're the ones that have to go out of their driveways. They're the ones that are going to have things built behind them. I would have the same concerns if it was in my backyard. And I might be thinking totally different than maybe I do originally. And that's exactly where I'm coming from. My concerns on this property have done a 180-degree turn. And the first one to do that to me was my son, who's on the council at Woodbury. When I told him how I felt about it, and he told me to grow up. Because this wasn't 1932 anymore. This was the year 2007. And take a look at what's happening with things. You're not looking at it for today. We're looking at it for 50 years from now.
Let's see if anybody else can, make a speech that draws clapping. You're next, Mr. Marzoff. That may be a difficult act to follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think back to the January 7th letter written by Gary and Joanne Campbell, who I understand belongs to this community group. And in that letter to the editor in the Hudson Star Observer, they spoke about what kind of a legacy are we going to leave for future generations. And they also addressed the issue of the disappointment that underage students had at the time petitions were being circulated throughout the community as to the disposition of this land. And they spoke to the fact that those underage citizens were very disappointed that because of their age, they couldn't express an opinion regarding something that would have a great deal to do with them in their future years. And at the citizens meeting on February 28th, at which I was present, one of those young people came. He happens to be autistic, and he brought with him a limestone fossil that he had found while playing with his friends in the wooded portion of this 82-acre parcel. And he was so proud of that fossil that he had picked up on the ground when he was down there hiding. I guess they were playing a child's game of some sort, and here he discovered this limestone fossil. And he cherished that moment, and he cherishes his fossil, and most of all, he cherishes the land. And I strongly urge all of us to take into mind the words of Chief Seattle, who said, "We do not own the land, it is on loan to us from future generations." And we can't avoid overlooking those future generations.
Anybody else wish to be heard? Mr. Mortensen.
Yes, I would like to echo many of the same words that have been mentioned, but my concern is that I can't see through the crystal ball today in our future growth in the county. Maybe Health and Human Services from New Richmond someday might be located here. I don't know that, but another remark was, don't sell ourselves short. So we don't have to be in any rush in this process. We can gain the knowledge of the whole county at this time, but we don't have to make any decisions, and we can just take the time to do it and do it properly, or hopefully.
Mr. Cranmer.
Yes, I'd like to add my voice to the Go Slow group on the county board. It occurred to me that when I was thinking about some of the things people had said to me during the public meeting on February 28th, and coupled with some discussion of the health insurance that took place on the Finance Committee a couple of months ago, that it might be well to think about this land in conjunction with wellness for county employees. Because, as I understand it, there are people who already are going for walks in the wooded portion of the northwest quadrant. And one of the things that was suggested during that meeting, during that finance meeting, was that at some point, perhaps very soon, the county board will be asked to make some decisions regarding health insurance questions, and one of the aspects of that would be to encourage wellness among the employees, which might encompass not merely the recreational opportunities nearby and walks and so forth, but it also occurred to me that we have perhaps a mutuality of interests with the YMCA, because one of the suggestions at that same Finance Committee meeting was that perhaps there should be some a deal made with the YMCA, between the county and the YMCA, to provide memberships available or discounts for memberships among county employees who are working here at the government center and the YMCA to encourage wellness for them. And perhaps since they are looking for land and we are maybe looking for some sort of wellness program here, that there may be a deal potentially between not merely the, between the county between the county and its employees and the YMCA. And that there might be a discount on land purchase in the future, and that there also might be some opportunity for walking recreation in a, which neighbors could also be using, along with county employees in the wooded or open areas of the northwest quadrant. Now, all of this creates a great deal of, will create a great deal of discussion, have to be studied at some length, because there are many questions that arise about all of this. But it does seem to me that this is a very viable series of questions that we should look into before we make any decision at all. And so I would hope that we have our discussion about the health insurance questions prior to making any decision at all about the land that the county currently, excuse me, currently owns.
Any other questions for Dennis or the Finance Committee? Right, well, the chair is going to declare a recess. Those of you who wish to have your pictures taken and your ID badges can begin that process, and we'll come back when the big end is on the 7th. Mr. Rebel.
Aren't there, is there a room where we can, where stuff is on the wall that we can go look at during break?
I brought the flip.
7, next, amendments to the Code of Ordinances for Land Use and Development, Chapter 13, et cetera, et cetera. And the minute hand is well past the 7, so let's do it. I see that this comes from the Planning and Zoning Committee, and its chairman, Mr. Habegger, is not here today. Someone else wish to move the resolution?
I will move this to the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Burry. Mr. Troyer seconds it. This is proposed amendments to the ordinances pertaining to land use. I see that, does somebody from the committee wish to speak to it, or did you want to call on Mr. Fedrosi for it, or some combination thereof?
I would call on Dave, please.
All right, while he's making his way to a microphone, I'll introduce, for sake of the television audience, David Fedrosi, who is the Director of the Planning and Zoning Department, St. Croix County.
Good morning. We have a couple of amendments to the Land Division Ordinance before you this morning. These amendments were initiated through a number of town officials in the county and landowners, in fact, operating through those town officials, principally led by Mary Murphy, the town chair in the town of Kinnickinnick. There were concerns with the way the ordinance had been adopted last year, that for any plats that had setbacks recorded on the lots on the final plat, the way the ordinance was originally adopted, it would only apply to vacant lots. And there were some landowners that had some issues with that as it applied to lots that had some structures on them, that they wanted to add a deck or an outbuilding or something like that. And Mary brought the issues forward, worked with us and the committee to develop these changes. There was some push to make the changes more broader than they are, in consultation with Mary and the other town officials and the committee. we made it a rather limited change to allow, we eliminated the language that limited changing the setbacks on a plat on vacant, only to vacant lots to allow structures, included some factors for the committee to consider as a part of that review, and added the opportunity for landowners who had already developed their lot to go through a review process with a committee and reduce those setbacks. We also put, as a part of the conversation, the other amendment is to eliminate the requirement to put the setback on the final plats. It's caused some issues in the past. We would still obviously have them submitted as a part of the preliminary plat process, make sure we have an adequate building envelope for all the lots that are created. And the other thing that played into that is a number of the towns, the setbacks are already covered and established through the zoning ordinance, and we have a number of towns who have their own subdivision ordinances and are trying to impose greater setbacks, and so we expect that they will continue the requirement to have their setbacks shown on the final plat, and taking this requirement out of our ordinance would help eliminate some of the confusion associated with that. So that's sort of the background process of the change. I don't think I probably need to say a whole lot more than that. It's a pretty simple thing. Are there any questions? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
At the current time, are you showing setbacks on CSMs and plats for the setback from navigable bodies of water?
All of the setbacks, whether it's under general zoning or through the shoreland or riverway ordinance, are all included as a part of the submittals with the preliminary plat and establishing the contiguous buildable area.
But will setbacks from water no longer be shown on the final CSM or plat?
Right. This would eliminate including the setbacks on final plats.
It just seemed like a good, I mean, this seemed to be aimed at roads and road setbacks, so I wondered about that because it's a good consumer tool to have that setback from the navigable bodies of water on the final product, so that, you know, it saves the consumer from spending money and doing things that later have to be reversed. And sometimes, you know, it's an opportunity when it's shown on that CSM or plat for them to realize that they just bought a piece of land that they can't get up close to the edge of the water necessarily. So I just wondered why you would want to eliminate that one.
I guess it's our goal here with including the setbacks, or the setbacks are all included in the zoning ordinance, including the shoreland ordinance. If those setbacks are to change at all, it can create a conflict with that recorded plat. And our main interest is having all of those setbacks included as a part of the preliminary plat to make sure, again, that we've got adequate contiguous buildable area. The setbacks are still in place. They just wouldn't be listed on the final plat itself. I guess it's a judgment call. Yes, and that was, again, part of our reasoning for not having them included on the final plat. We have probably over half the towns in the county have their own subdivision ordinances that they're requiring that, and those setbacks can actually vary from town to town, and therefore they would implement those different setbacks through their subdivision ordinance. So if they have a more restrictive setback, that's how they would do it, and overall the system would honor that.
I was wondering, I'm not sure about the approval process for final plats. When you have a final plat and the county agrees to a final plat, or the responsible agency of the county does, what happens then? Does it then go to the township for approval? Or I'm not quite clear on this process. It seems to me that if it's a final plat, it's a final plat.
That's correct, and the towns participate as a part of the review process, both at the preliminary plat stage, when most of the details on a plat are worked out, and then also review and comment on a final plat. And actually, the towns have to sign off on a final plat in terms of dedications and for tax purposes. So the towns are very much involved in the process right through the final plat process. What this provision provides is an opportunity for landowners where those setbacks have been placed on the final plat. It allows a landowner a process to go back and get an adjustment in that so that they could have a lesser setback that meets current zoning regulations on their lot.
So is a final plat not approved until the township makes its own judgment about through the negotiation with property owner?
Correct. The final plat has to be signed by the town before it can be recorded, and the recording is the final step in the process.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Planning and Zoning Committee for moving this forward, and I had a number of constituents in my district that wanted to build additions and couldn't, and this provides a process for them to do that, and I would urge the county board to vote for this. Thank you.
Anything else, Supervisor, before we vote? Ms. Norton-Baumann.
Thank you. My understanding of this is that, for instance, if there were a property out in the county, and that property at one time had a building on it that met the setback requirement, and then the new setback requirements came in and they no longer met the setback requirement, that now they will be able to, in fact, meet the new ordinance by applying to get the setback reduced so that their building will again be in compliance. Is that correct?
That's a pretty fair assessment, yes.
Okay, what will it cost that party to do that?
We currently, this would use a waiver process that we have in the ordinance. There was a concern not to just grant these without public input, so it is going to require public hearing, notice to adjoining landowners to do that, and I believe our rate for that right now is $800 or $850.
That was one of the concerns that was brought to me, that some property owners in the county who were in compliance at one time do not wish to add anything onto the building which is now not in compliance, will be required to come up with what seems to be a significant fee to get back in compliance. And I don't think that that's very fair.
Any other discussion or debate? Ms. Spear.
Was this reviewed by Corporation Counsel? His signature is not here.
Yes, we had, actually our staff worked with intern from Corporation Counsel's office reviewing these amendments. We got several suggested changes, and some of them structural with the language that we were modifying that were very helpful to sort of make this cleaner and clear. There were a couple of specific individual wording changes that we didn't change for specific reasons in terms of how it would play out. So yes, it was.
Mr. Raymond.
Yeah, following up on the comment made with regard to the fee structure, is there a way that a resident whose property was in compliance, and then we changed the ordinance and made them not in compliance, and now we've changed the ordinance again and they are in compliance, can get that rectified without paying $800 and not goofing up the fact that we don't want to we don't want to make this so that it doesn't require some effort on the part of people.
I hope my answer to Ms. Norton-Bauman's question didn't mislead or miscommunicate something. In most cases, what happened here is that last year, with the changes to the zoning ordinance, the setbacks were actually reduced. And that so that in most cases, most of the individuals, at least that we've dealt with so far, are without any problem in compliance with the setbacks in the ordinance as they're current right now. But they have been bound because the setback was paced on the plat when the lot was initially platted, so that this is a way to reduce the setback on that plat, so that they have available to them the lower setbacks that are available in the ordinance now. The main concern about having a review process like this with a hearing and all is that there's clearly the potential to reduce the setback on a specific lot, depending on the arrangement with surrounding lots. That could cause a problem in terms of allowing one neighbor to build substantially closer to a road, say, than all the surrounding neighbors. We had the potential concerns as a part of our discussion, with the committee and the public hearing, that that review process is needed. Now, the committee, and we had some discussion of this at the committee level, and was the fact that the committee establishes the fee schedule for all of these procedures. And one of the things we discussed as a part of the discussion of this is there any way that we could reduce the fee for this particular process? And I guess we're certainly willing to look at that in terms of, the hearing costs and the notice costs are pretty much fixed, but in terms of how much time and effort staff has to spend on these is something we could look at.
Mr. Dowd.
Dave, you said that some of the townships you met with, you talked to them about it. Were any of them in disagreement with this, or was it unanimous? They all agreed with your resolution?
The efforts with the towns was really led by Mary Murphy from Kinnickinnick. She actually sent out a letter requesting input. I want to believe she had something like 7 or 8 towns that actually sent back either motions or minutes or something in an effort of support. We also discussed it with the Towns Association quarterly meeting at the end of January prior to going to public hearing. Yeah, I guess you could say it was, there were really the concerns that were raised. I think there were 3 or 4 towns at the public hearing, and the one thing that was clear is they wanted to make sure the way this was written that they would be able to still administer greater setbacks, more restrictive setbacks in their towns through their subdivision ordinances, and we assured them that they would.
I agree with Supervisor Awesome that this has really lessened some of the problems. But we had a couple of cases, and one question that came up: if the situation were not rectified and they had to go to the Board of Adjustments, is that a separate fee? I believe is that $1,000? Or what does it cost to bring something to the Board of Adjustments?
Well, that would
sliding scale.
Right. That would be. But here again, this is something where these setbacks that people are trying to deal with are where they are recorded on their plat, and it's not. I guess it's not something that typically would be under the purview of the Board of Adjustment under the Land Division Ordinance. So we were looking for a process to get this done. But you're right. I mean, if something were to be handled as, say, a variance through the Board of Adjustment, typically under the zoning ordinance, right, it would be it would be a sizable fee as well.
What is that fee?
I believe that's well, depending on what the action is, those are up around $1,000 as well.
Ms. Gunderson.
Thanks. To follow up on Supervisor Lucky's comments, I'm wondering how will, if it's not on the plat map, how will the purchaser know where the boundaries are? Is there some other literature that they get? How will, I don't know that process, so can you tell me how they'll know?
We have, I guess, you know, again, they would, all of those items would be identified on the preliminary plat. Obviously, the professionals that work with purchasers, you know, typically check on a lot of those things. We're available. Certainly, we get a lot of those kinds of calls from either potential purchasers or their agents about the relationship between properties and water bodies, or regulations in general, for that matter. So there's, I guess, a lot of interaction by everybody in the process to identify where those different regulations come into play. Well, one, by recording it on the plat, it locks it in. So if those things ever change in the corresponding ordinance, primarily in the zoning ordinance, then there's, you know, you've got a conflict between the two, and that's what we're wrestling with in this particular case. The other thing that again, I'll mention we have going on is a number of the towns have their own subdivision ordinances that require greater setbacks than the county does, and they will be using their subdivision ordinances much in the same way, requiring those setbacks to be identified on the plats. And so by requiring, you know, we're trying to avoid requiring different setbacks on the plats itself when the setbacks are already covered in the zoning ordinance for county purposes.
The question again?
The setback from water is not going to vary from town to town, is it?
No.
So, you know, that wouldn't be pertinent then. I mean,
Those setbacks from water are set basically by NR 115, aren't they, which is currently under study by the Natural Resources Board. Ms. Norton-Baumann.
Yes, I'll try to be brief. I have just one more question. If I have a farm in the country and I have a building that's not now in a conforming use because of a setback change, at one point it was and now it's not, and I have a storm or a fire and my home or my barn or whatever gets burned down, what do I have to do then to rebuild that building?
Again, with this particular, if you've got a non-conforming structure, and again, with the changes that we've done in the zoning ordinance last year, by reducing those setbacks, we've probably made a number of previously non-conforming structures conforming, because we, in effect, cut those road setbacks in half. In the case where you do have a non-conforming structure, your replacement will depend on you'll either have to rebuild it to conform, or if that's a difficulty, seek a variance.
Not to beat this, but I just really want to have a clarification. If I know that I was at one point conforming, now I'm not conforming, and I choose not to come to get the variance that's going to cost me $1,000 or whatever dollars, but I know that I will, if I come and get the variance, be conforming. But I decide not to get that variance. I don't want to spend $1,000 for the county to tell me I'm in conformance. And then I lose my building. Then what happens?
I guess I'm trying to emphasize with this particular change, we have all, you know, it's sort of in the opposite direction. We reduced the setbacks last year. If we would have increased them, then there would have been the situation where we would have likely or made a number of structures that were previously conforming non-conforming. We actually went the other way with the changes in the zoning ordinance last year when we reduced the setbacks. And this very specific amendment that we're looking at this morning is intended to give landowners an opportunity to bring their previously platted lot in connection in terms of the setbacks on the plat that were platted at the time with the new lower setbacks in the zoning ordinance. You know, it's the conflict that's created by having the setbacks recorded on the plat.
Are you now ready to vote? All those in favor of the amendments should now vote aye. Aye. And opposed, nay. Chair declares that the motion is passed. Number 8 on our agenda is a resolution approving the position of Human Resources Administrator, reorganizing human resources positions and functions, and authorizing funding. Mine looks like this. This is coming from the Finance Committee, where it was unanimously approved. Mr. Kruger makes the motion. Is there a second? Ms. Wentz seconds the motion. Anybody wish to discuss this? Mr. Borup.
Why is it mid-year, and do we now have more personnel in the department than we did under the old system?
Mr. Kruger, do you wish to address that?
I guess I'd like to refer to our administrative coordinator. Do you want to explain this all, Chuck? This all started when the personnel manager submitted her retirement notice, and we went out for recruitment, and we had one candidate that we felt was suitable for the position, and was not able to get the person to take the pay at top of scale. I reported that back to the Finance Committee, the idea of asking the personnel manager to stay on past the projected retirement date. The committee talked about it, suggested that staff go back and rework the job description and duties to allow for a higher rate of pay. Came back to the committee with some options. One of the things that I felt was important is that if the pay rate starts going up, you really need to start having that position have some administrative support. Otherwise, you're just adding another high-paid position without support. So the middle ground is kind of where the committee came on this, with the decision that they would ask that the personnel manager stay in the position. So there is an additional position in the department. It would actually be more of a department perhaps than it currently looks, but yes, there is a net increase of one position that is not budgeted for, and I believe the Finance Committee would be looking towards the contingency fund for that.
Mr. Mortensen.
I think it was a year ago, January, when we lost a personnel manager. Did we replace that person?
What the board approved at that time was to have the director responsibilities fall to my position, approve a new position called the Compensation Classification Specialist, which deals with the Springstead work, the pay grid, and the position pointing. And that's been in place since about a year ago at this time. The personnel position, the personnel manager position was actually the former assistant to the director of personnel. Same person, same pay. This proposal keeps the personnel manager position based on the decision the Finance Committee made.
Any other questions, or are you ready to vote?
I've got a question.
Mr. King?
On it says here, Human Resources Administrator. Is this going to be a position the same as the Personnel Director was in the past?
It's actually 2 pay grades less, and it reports to my position.
And who is going to, is Finance Committee going to hire this person?
That's the committee that oversees this area, yeah.
Mr. Raymond?
Yeah, I guess 2 questions. The first one, there's been some confusion as to who's the go-to person and all this kind of stuff. And I know that staff people that I work with have voiced some concerns. Is this going to clean up that chain of command? That's the first question.
I would think that this person will end up being viewed as probably the first contact in the suite instead of myself.
Are we still going to have this, and if I'm wrong, you just, excuse me, feel the old number, but the 3-headed kind of thing that represents the personnel department, or will this be someone that represents the full scope of the personnel department? Yes. Okay, I assume that was true, but I felt, also, we abandoned or we disbanded the personnel committee when we did this stuff a year ago. And I know we've put together an ad hoc committee to go work personnel stuff periodically, and we continue to vest more and more oversight in the Finance Committee. And should we now entertain the idea of reintroducing a personnel committee or something where there's where that oversight that we had before is put back in place, since we seem to need it periodically anyway?
Chair is going to call on Mr. Standifer, who is kind of the architect of the organization that we have, and catch him off guard, of course, but as the person with the most recent experience, I guess we could fairly say, in organization, the one who put together the options that were considered when the HR director position became vacant, and to whom I at least always turn when there's such a question. Is that enough? Have I stalled long enough, Mr. Standifer, for you to formulate an answer?
No.
Well, then let me see. What else do we have here?
Well, I think the short answer to the question is no. I do not think we need to go back to a department head level position. I think that the indication so far is that the structure is working successfully. We indicated at that time being when we disbanded the department head level position, that what we needed was actually more workers and less supervisors, and this gives us the opportunity to do that. I'm still comfortable that we're on the right track.
Follow up, I was referring more to a kind of a committee action rather than not trying to elevate the position up 2 grades, and but more the you know, some a personnel committee again, or some derivative of that.
I don't think we do.
Mr. Kruger.
If you look at this chart that has been put in your items, the blue is what we classify as non-representative people, correct, Chuck? And the orange colored are union employees, and the green is the new person in the block. When you look at this chart, if anybody has any further questions about it, Is that correct, Chuck? Okay.
Mr.
I know it's
Rebholz.
not marked down there, but if you have a problem, does everybody follow that?
I would like to know what the difference is in responsibilities of a human resources administrator and a human resources specialist.
The human resources specialist position currently is that's actually the person that you went to for your ID badges. And her main responsibility is to manage the input of employee data, the things that go along with being hired or changing your information, and so it may affect your the employee's insurance or some of their other benefits. There's a lot of work that goes into that. This position is a higher grade position that is more of a manager position, oversees that function, tries to coordinate it with the pay system, the system that we have for managing position descriptions. It's also going to take on labor relations functions, being the person who would review union contracts and non-represented people's personnel handbook, and try to make sure that all those policies that we have and the administrative functions that we have are actually complementary to each other and consistent with each other. To be frank, that hasn't always been the case. The personnel manager position, you didn't ask me on this one, but the main duty there is the hiring functions, the interviewing, the support for departments who are trying to recruit and fill positions. She's been in on pretty much every interview process that we've had. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think I remember another hand. Mr. Marzal.
Thank you. On the job description sheet that we were given, 4 of the paragraphs refer to duties that involve pay and personnel policies. And I was just wondering if the newly adopted paid part-time off program would then have this person, the Human Resources Administrator, under you, Mr. Whiting, and subject to review by the Finance Committee, would this person then be the go-to person for an employee?
Yes, if we want to boil this down to a new go-to person besides myself, I suppose this would be the person you would go to. You can always come to me, but I might have you go to this person.
Thank you.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. With this type of organization and with all the personnel committee, as I understand it, who assumes the responsibility for negotiating labor contracts with our unions?
Well, you have the ad hoc negotiations committee that consists of Mr. Standiford, Mr. King, and Ms. Leonard. For this term, those are, that's an appointed committee, and it would be the people until April of '08. Their work will, swing into high speed towards the end of this year, as I believe all of our contracts expire at the end of this calendar year. 4 out of 5. Anything else you need to know before we vote on this, supervisors?
May I ask for a roll call vote, Mr. Chairman?
You certainly may, and your request must be honored. So we will conduct a roll call vote, and it begins with whom? With Mr. Peterson.
Oh, I like that. Okay. Yes. That's for the organization.
And the whole resolution.
Okay. Jerry Peterson is yes. Charlie Grant? Tom Dowd?
Yes.
Chuck Mells?
Yes.
Richard King?
Yes.
Wallace Haphagers absent. John Mortensen?
Yes.
Esther Wentz?
Yes.
Gordon Awesome?
Yes.
Tom Kappa, Chuck Strumke, Richard Marzal?
Yes.
Sharon Norton Bauman?
Yes.
Ronald Troyer?
Yes.
Roger Rebholz?
Yeah.
Bill Cranmer?
Yes.
Daryl Standifer?
Yes.
John Borup?
No.
Clarence Malick?
Yes.
Don Jordan is gone. Ron Raymond?
No.
Cindy Leonard?
Yes.
Linda Lucky?
Yes.
Stan Kruger?
Yes.
Denise Gunderson?
Yes.
Lois Burry?
Yes.
Brian Hirchin?
Yes.
Julie Spear?
No.
Joe Hirchin?
Yes.
And Bill Peavy.
Chair declares the motion has passed, and what is the count? Next up will be the nursing home report, Fred and Bill. Six absent, 2 yes, we got 25 votes. The vote tally was 21-4. The nursing home report. Mr. Johnson, welcome to our microphone.
Thank you. I don't have a lot more detail than what was discussed during Chuck Whiting's report. The committee that was, I don't remember the specific date that the committee was appointed, but I'll remind folks of the committee members. Stan Kruger is the chair. Esther Wentz is the vice chair. Buck Malick is the secretary. Gordon Awesome, Tom Kaflish, Don Jordan, Dr. Mike Kretz, and Daryl Staniford make up the balance of the Nursing Home Proposal Review Committee. The last meeting was March 19th, just yesterday, and that's when the decision was made to work with Christian Community Homes and Services of Hudson as the preferred service provider. So we have met quickly and I think rather efficiently as a group. I think that was the 4th meeting. The next meeting is scheduled for April 10th. And again, the purpose of the meetings is to review the proposals that put the county in the best position to look at options. Additionally, the committee has met quickly and again efficiently because if all will remember in the RFP, the timeline to trying to identify some sort of a transaction was the third calendar quarter of 2007. So that is really all I have to report today to the committee.
It might be appropriate to mention that, well, most of the committee's work has been in closed session, so naturally there's not a lot to say. The retention of the lawyer is an external fact, isn't it?
Yes, I believe so. Myself and Chuck Whiting and Bill Van Offeren worked to look at options with regard to a law firm that could represent the county's interest in this process. And that law firm that a retainer agreement was signed with was DeWitt, Ross, and Stevens. The primary attorneys that have been identified at this point are Brad Rath, he actually attended the meeting yesterday, and a Brian Pertel. So that's who we will be working with regard to negotiations.
Anything from the supervisors? Ms. Spear.
Just have one report I would like to make. On the 12th, I went to a Springfield town board, and I was approached by a gentleman who knew all about the closed session. I found out later that what he was telling me was in closed session. Now, I don't know how that's gotten out, but this isn't the first time that this has happened with a closed session, that people out there find out about it. So we have some loose lips, as they used to say.
The kind that sink ships, even in Springfield, huh? Which is not known for its water bodies. Anything else anybody wishes to say? Mr. Borup?
Any idea on what our time frame is for this to come to fruition?
Well, you alluded to the resolution, or the RFP, which was approved by this committee, this body, talking about the third calendar quarter. You might also remember budget discussions. Enough money was put in the budget to handle the anticipated cost through calendar year 2007. Mr. King.
Is the county board going to get a chance to vote on this before it's approved, before we even get it?
Absolutely. All right, on the rest of our agenda, as I mentioned, the Veteran Service Office will be rescheduled. The Public Protection Committee has a report back regarding the medical examiner and fentanyl. Ms. Spear?
Well, the county board has received all this information, so I'm not going to go through it again. But I would like to have you take note that the Health and Human Services have also looked at the fentanyl and the actions of the public nurse. The information has been sent out to you. Hopefully you've had a chance to read it. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
And this morning, there was a handout on my desk, at least, signed by Ms. Wentz, the chair of the Health and Human Services Board, with an additional FDA public health advisory on fentanyl, indicating activity that the public health officer had taken with regard to that drug, which can be very dangerous if misused, apparently. Mr. Kruger, this was your question that's being answered here. Are you satisfied with the responses you've got?
I'm above satisfaction with the response. Thank you very much.
Very good. All right. Ms. Lucky?
Well, I see that this handout we received apparently from the Office of the Medical Examiner is encouraging people to flush the used patches down the toilet. And that concerns me because there's been a lot of publicity nationwide recently about how prescription medications are being flushed and ending up in our bodies of water, from which we then draw our drinking water, and not to mention our fish that we eat and so on and so forth. So it would be nice, and there are efforts nationwide to come up with alternative means of disposal of these either used type items like this or unused prescription drugs, so that they don't end up polluting our drinking water. So I guess I would encourage us to look into something like that for this county, so that we're not urging people to be flushing these things.
Is there another hand? Mr. Mills?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to have it recorded that Mr. Swetlick should be recognized and thanked for his individual efforts in the in-depth investigation of this fentanyl thing. We're talking about 3 deaths in St. Croix County that required some pretty in-depth pathological research and during the autopsies, and possibly a 4th one, for 2 reasons. It's brought the issue to a head as far as what other types of tests should be made during an autopsy, and secondly, it's brought the issue of the potential hazards to the public. And he did this on his own volition.
Any other comments? Mr. Rebel?
I don't know about this, but can anybody tell me what the legal ramifications are for people who share those kind of drugs?
I'm sure there's someone that may not be in this room. Do you wish to have that referred to either the Public Protection Committee or the Health and Human Services Board? And this is an opiate, as the, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, as Ms. Wentz's letter indicates. All right. Mr. Kruger being satisfied, there being no other questions, that take care of that. We will hear next month from the Administration Committee regarding the decorum bylaw, county clerk's report of correspondence and rezoning. I'm sorry, Ms. Gunderson?
Thanks. Excuse me. Actually, when I approved the consent agenda, I had a question, but it was okay that I approved the consent agenda also. My question was if the board would wish to bring the committee and the department reports up on the agenda so that when we do have department heads reporting to us, that they don't have to sit in the back waiting, and they can be doing their job more efficiently for us. And the other thing is that sometimes when the meetings run a little bit late, they get pushed aside and kind of glossed over. And it is the only time that I hear some of what's going on in parts of the county that I'm not on the committee and stuff. So I just would like to maybe either just move that up or have a discussion about that, or what the board's wishes are.
How about if we consider that the order that we have is embedded in our bylaws now. The agenda that we have in front of us is taken from the bylaws. So your question is implicating a potential bylaw amendment. How about if the chair refers it to the administration committee? And you can send your comments to the administration committee, and they would report back no later than our second board meeting after that, earlier if ready to do so. If they have a specific proposal, it'd get aired here before the full board and could be debated. Ms. Lucky.
Well, rather than having them sit in the back twiddling their thumbs, why couldn't we just telephone them when it's time for them to appear?
Well,
we do
frankly,
that
we
for
typically do try to do that. Ms. Campbell and I make every attempt to manage around department heads who have time constraints or are suffering by not being able to bring work with them and work on it in their lap and so on while they're here. It's quite common for us to change the order to match the needs of people, of department heads to be somewhere else or that kind of thing. I think you would all understand that part of the bylaw that delegates to the presiding officer of the county board the ability to change around the meeting order on a particular day for good reason is used quite frequently. Of course, many of the items on any given agenda call for some department head to be present. The old new business items very frequently have a department head there too. So when we take committee and department reports and we move that higher, we are in a sense saying that the other old and new business items are to come later. We do try to work with that, and we have a telephone here, and we try to use it just as we did with the judges this morning. We can have a full discussion of that in front of the administration committee if that's deemed appropriate, and get it back here in front of the county board at a future date. Anybody else wish to say anything about that right now? Well, they were multitasking earlier on his PDA and his telephone, I'm sure. On to the county clerk's report of correspondence and rezoning requests.
First of all, before the finance committee members leave, I have some resolutions that need your signature, please. With regard to rezoning, hearing scheduled for Planning and Zoning Committee, Wayne C. Alverman, rezone approximately 10 acres from ag to ag residential in the town of Ceylon. Christopher Kath, rezone approximately 2 acres from ag residential to commercial in the town of St. Joe. And new rezoning applications submitted but not scheduled for hearing for Larry and Mary Bauer, rezone approximately 38 acres from ag to ag residential in the town of Troy. I do have a thank you note. County Board, thank you for the beautiful bouquet of fresh flowers. They brightened up my day. I'm currently just doing great and plan to be at the March County Board meeting. Hope to see you all there. Lois Burry.
We're delighted. Re-emphasize that the next meeting will be followed by a session that's being organized by the Administration Committee to revisit those goals that we set at the outset of our term. So we're apt to go for much of the day at the April meeting. Budget your time appropriately, all right? Other than that, we're at the, Mr. Mills.
Quick announcement, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if everybody realizes, but Charlie Grant has got his picture on the front of the county's Roadwork magazine, along with a dump truck and a front loader, so he might be able to show you that picture.